Do you believe in satellites? The biggest consumer of helium is NASA, using annually almost 75 million cubic feet, followed by the USA Department of Defense, which uses a significant quantity to cool liquid hydrogen and oxygen for rocket fuel. A balloon satellite, also occasionally referred to as a sataloon, which is a trademark name owned by Gilmore-Schildels GT, is inflated with gas after it has been put into orbit. And you can see here that sataloons were launched as early as 1958. So when exactly did satellites come around? Well, it says here that satellites were actually invented a year before sataloons, in 1957. And many of you may not know this, but the inventor of the idea of the satellite was Arthur C. Clarke in 1945. Arthur's official occupation title was a science fiction writer. Arthur would also later go on to work with film director Stanley Kubrick, and together they would work with NASA. Since the first satellite was claimed to have been launched in 1957, there has been over 8,000 that have been launched since, and over 4,000 are still claimed to be in orbit. Now that we're up to date, let's take a look at a video by Project Loon.
While many of us take the internet for granted, large parts of the world are still unconnected. In big towns and cities, providing connectivity with cell towers is economical, as there are lots of people there wanting to connect. But the further away from these towns and cities you go, the fewer people there are, until eventually connectivity just stops. To bring the internet to people in these areas, we need to look up, way up, into the stratosphere. From here, we can provide connectivity across much larger areas, bringing the benefits of the internet to more people. So how do we get there? With balloons. Really big balloons. Beginning their journey from one of our custom-built balloon launchers, our balloons are filled with lighter-than-air gas and released up into the skies. Rising 20 kilometers into the stratosphere, Loon balloons float twice as high as airplanes, well above weather and wildlife. To get to where they need to go, Loon balloons sail the winds by moving up or down into different wind currents traveling in different directions, joining other balloons in small teams over areas where connectivity is needed. Ground stations connected to local internet service providers send signal up to the balloons and then back down to the ground over large distances, allowing people to connect directly to the internet with an LTE mobile phone. When it is eventually time for our balloons to come down, we navigate them to remote areas and work with local air traffic control to manage their slow descent down to Earth, where they're collected by our recovery teams. By repeating this process at scale, we hope to provide continued connectivity to users on the ground, bringing the internet to more people in more places around the world.
Now, most of you won't bat an eye at the fact that NASA has kind of gone backwards in their technology. But did they really go backwards, or have they just been using sataloons all along?
Yeah, a bit of sci-fi hitting home for a Michigan couple when a satellite crash-landed in their backyard, and their reaction? Priceless.
Never know what's going to happen. This baby fell out of the sky and landed in our yard.
Nancy and Dan Welke, cool as cucumbers, discovering a satellite that had crash landed on their property, still blinking and still attached to a parachute, and still attached to a parachute, and still attached to a parachute. Turns out the satellite belonged to Samsung, which launched it just days ago as part of a PR stunt to do the world's first selfie in space.
Was NASA's multi-billion-dollar blunder in the Central Australian desert. A report into the crash of a space balloon has found a lack of safety precautions could have resulted in deaths as onlookers were sent running for their lives.
It was a takeoff in the central Australian desert with high hopes of exploring the final frontier. Instead, plans came crashing to the ground. The failed launch of a balloon carrying a multi-million-dollar space telescope had onlookers scrambling for safety.
There was just lots of noise and we really thought we were gone.
It was just an instance of chaos outside. We were expecting to be wiped out.
The cargo broke free during takeoff. It was dragged out of control, crashing through a fence into a car. It left onlookers running for their lives.
Just barely made it out without getting smashed.
NASA's dream of entering the stratosphere ended up as a pile of space junk.
Forget it, Bart. It's so bright out you can't see anything in the sky except the Fox satellite.
Challenge you to find any existing photo or video of a satellite in orbit. However, what you will find when you search is only CGI images and animations, such as the video I'll show you right now.
Ignition. Liftoff of an ILS Proton from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan with Inmarsat 5F3 satellite on board.
Oh, it's a very complicated effort. You've got a rocket that weighs over 1 million pounds. You have the booster vehicle, which has 3 stages of the Proton boost. That essentially drops off the upper stage, which is a BRIES-M upper stage.
14 or 15 hours later, the satellite is separated from the final stage of the rocket. We then receive telemetry and at our control center here. And then we go through a long process of raising the satellite orbit up to geostationary.
We have our Mission Control Center in El Segundo, California. And after launch, when the rocket drops us off, engineers then take control of the satellite and take the satellite to its final location on orbit.
At that point, you're in what they call a highly elliptical orbit. So the next phase of the mission is to start doing burns, that's rocket thrust, from the spacecraft itself, to turn that highly elliptical orbit into a nice circular geosynchronous geostationary orbit. There are some electric engines, which will raise the orbit for the final part.
It takes approximately 2 months to get it to orbit. Once it's there, we work with the Inmarsat team and the Inmarsat engineers and test out the satellite.
And after making sure all the units on board are behaving as expected, they've all survived the rigorous experiences of being launched through this orbit, we can then go on to the next level of testing, which is the kind of identifying the performance level that we've achieved. And so it's a really, it's a long process before we're able to declare the spacecraft fit to carry traffic for our commercial customers.
So you're going to tell me that out of the over 8,000 satellites launched and the 4,000 that are apparently still in orbit, that we have no video of how a satellite is actually deployed into orbit. Let's come back to this and think about something else. In all of the International Space Station feeds that you see, do you ever once see a satellite in orbit? Surely with all this space debris, you would expect to see at least one satellite in any of the feeds, yet you never do. That you can see satellites in the sky at night from your fixed position on Earth, but you're already shooting yourself in the foot with that one. Satellites are roughly the size of a car, and satellites are said to orbit around the Earth at 22,000 miles of altitude. The human eyeball cannot possibly detect an object the size of a car that is at that distance. What you are actually seeing in the sky are satelloons, and they're a lot closer than you think. So about now, many of you are probably asking how we get our internet and satellite television. 99% of international data are transmitted through submarine cables. For other means, we use high-altitude balloons, planes and drones, towers, antennas, and parabolic reflectors. Outside and take a look at your own satellite dish. Does it appear to be pointing straight up into the sky, or somewhat horizontally? So what is the point of all this? As this meme points out, if satellites are fake, then why satellite dishes? Well, folks, it's because the Earth is flat. It's because we are in a beautiful, created, enclosed system that was created by God. Information or videos like this, please follow my YouTube at EOT Media or my Instagram at Enemy of the Media.